Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Academic Tradecraft Workshop number 6, which is entitled on Learning to Love the Questions Themselves. I'm Mark Goodale, this academic year Leverhulme Trust Visiting Professor in Anthropology at the University of Oxford. And I want to welcome you all to the last AT workshop of the year. So this final academic tradecraft workshop steps back to consider the meaning of an academic career. In light of all the various difficulties, institutional, personal, sometimes financial, why do we do it? Is the answer to this question inevitably idiosyncratic, something to be asked and answered by each academic after his or her own fashion? Instead of suggesting one or more possible blueprints for finding meaning across the trajectory of an academic career, this workshop will explore the importance of meaning itself, the importance of developing a working philosophical outlook of whatever kind or content that can both serve as a guide to individual practice and a basis for something approaching fulfillment. So let me start with some preliminary remarks. So first, what do I mean by the importance of meaning itself? So when I talk about an academic philosophy, I don't mean philosophy in a strict disciplinary sense. What I mean is maybe even more metaphorical, a philosophy as an outlook, as an approach, as a perspective. However, it's a philosophy, framework, perspective that transcends your day-to-day academic work. That frames that academic work, something that animates your academic career. And a second preliminary point would be that this academic philosophy, as I'm describing it, requires intentionality. It's something that you have to work on, something that you have to think about, something that you have to carefully consider. So this overriding academic philosophy or framework, as you might imagine, will and probably should change over time. So it's worth returning to this philosophy, this framework, every so often. Now, I don't mean every day, I don't mean every year, every week, especially given the extended temporalities of academia. But perhaps just as a suggestion, one would return to the academic philosophy at key turning points in your career. New positions, new cities, new research directions, new courses that you might be thinking about teaching. Okay? All right, so as I've done in the other academic tradecraft workshops, there's also an argument, an underlying argument behind this one as well. And the argument, to start with a negative, is that the absence of such an intentional framework, the absence of such a intentionally thought out academic philosophy can make it feel like you were just stumbling from one task to the other. And at some point, you'll forget why you decided to become an academic in the first place, okay? But, to switch to the more positive part of the argument, with a fairly clear, as I just said, evolving academic philosophy, you will both be able to manage the many tasks much better, thinking about the workshop on academic simultaneity, since the framework will help you establish priorities and experience something like a sense of fulfillment, that you are doing these things, these many things that you work on as an academic, for the right reasons. And here, the key point is the right reasons for you. In other words, your academic philosophy or framework is yours and yours alone. Now, there will be many things in your academic career that you have no choice over, tasks that you must complete as part of whatever job you might have at any moment in your career. But meaning, what you value most, what can even give you a kind of joy over time, is yours and yours alone. It can't either be forced on you or taken away. So in thinking about these academic philosophy, what it means to create one for yourself, there are two categories that can and probably do coexist. In other words, two categories of academic meaning. And the first is what I would call an existential category or existential meaning. And what I mean is this is the way of thinking about this framework, this perspective in the broadest possible terms. That go right up to the limits, perhaps, of the way in which you think about yourself as a person, your identity. So, for example, and I'm not suggesting one or the other, but just a few different ways of thinking about this existential category that I thought about. First, you might decide or you might feel that you are an academic because you want to produce knowledge, that you want to be part of a process of creating greater understanding in your discipline and eventually in the world. Okay, so you might embrace that, you might think of as a kind of classic dimension of academia as your academic philosophy, the thing that if you follow it, if you think you're following it, if you try to follow it, will give you a sense of fulfillment over time. Another kind of existential academic philosophy would be something like you want to change people's lives as a guide or a mentor. You think about, and this happens in teaching, it happens in student supervision, it happens in more informal ways. There are many ways in which academics can become and are guides and mentors to others. So that might be another way in which you would think about the existential meaning. And then there are perhaps more political existential categories here, or subcategories. So you might think of yourself as an academic as a way to give you a role as a particular kind of engaged citizen. So you might think of yourself as producing knowledge and guiding others and engaging in service and so on. But the meaning, the thing that you value most is your role as an academic, which gives you the chance to be an engaged citizen. And even more political, and this, of course, sort of refers to more current developments in academia more recently, you might think of yourself more concretely as an academic, also as a political role, as somebody who wants to affect change in the world, even if that change demands resistance or provoking forms of social conflict. So, and there are many other possibilities. And the point is that your academic philosophy here is framed in the widest possible extent. As I said, in many ways coextensive with your identity itself. And then there's a second category of academic philosophies or ways in which you might think of this framework that animates your career. And this is what I think of as more pragmatic values, more pragmatic meaning. And as I said, this is not to say that the existential and the pragmatic don't coexist, they do. But here, if you intentionally create this framework for yourself, one that transcends the everyday and which animates it, you can focus more here on the actual activities that are part of an academic career, that transcend those activities, right? But are more closely tied than these existential things I just talked about. And in general, and it very much depends on the country, it very much depends on the academic system, it depends on a lot of things. But in my experience across diverse academic systems, there are really three ways in which these academic tasks are divided. The first is research, a second would be teaching, and a third is service. And versions of these three divisions, let's say, appear in all sorts of things. You might find this in job applications, a reference to these three in job applications. You might find these in promotion evaluations. There are many ways in which these three, this tripartite division, if you will, appears and is common. There's nothing really controversial about it. Now, of course, where you are and what your situation is, it'll depend on which of these three are emphasized the most, or which one is more important to a particular institution. But in general, that's a pretty traditional or unarguable way to divide the activities we do in academia. And as you begin your academic career and go through your academic career, you'll find that you will almost always have to engage in some activities, fulfill tasks in all three of these areas, just as part of your obligations in a position. However, this doesn't mean that you have to privilege all three equally, or more importantly, that you will find the same degree of fulfillment across these three, okay? Now, it's not a way of making a value judgment about these three categories. It's a way of saying that individual academics will naturally value these three differently, in the way in which they fit together differently. Because remember, even though you'll be in your academic career having to complete tasks, having to do activities, having to meet goals, objectives in all three of these different areas, what you value most, what gives you fulfillment, cannot be imposed. It is yours and yours alone. You can fulfill your tasks, you can do a good job across these three different categories, but the specific tasks, the specific, let's say, category of tasks that most fulfill you, that you find most, that you value most, is something that you can hold on to. And also, what I'll, again, those of you who are in academia already know this, of course, is that the way in which these three activities fit together for you on a month-to-month basis, on a year-to-year basis, will always be a melange, a mix. And as I said, it's a mix that's both, in a way, specific to the institution and also specific to you. So even though you find yourself in an institution that values teaching more, you yourself will figure out a melange, a mix between those three that fits you. So, and another thing about these three categories of activities, which are part of this pragmatic meaning, as I've described it, is you have to leave aside the ways in which these three themselves are valued by academia itself. I wouldn't say society, but sort of academic society. In other words, it could be that academia traditionally values research over service, let's say, or research over teaching, or in certain institutions, teaching over research, or a mix of teaching and service over research, okay? So there are these sort of different ways in which these categories are valued most. Nevertheless, you need to leave that aside in intentionally creating your own philosophy, your own framework. Because again, no matter where you find yourself, the goal of this academic philosophy is to give you the greatest chance to find fulfillment in your career, okay? So let me conclude with a glimpse, let's say, into my own academic philosophy, which I've done throughout the academic tradecraft. I've talked about my own experience as a way of sharing collectively about these different issues. So, and this also allows me to explain the workshop's title, so learning to love the questions themselves. So there's absolutely no question that I find a tremendous, in my own melange, in my own mix, I find a tremendous amount of fulfillment in teaching. And I teach a course in Lausanne, which is the Introduction to Anthropology course, which can have between 600 and 700 students in it. And these are first-year students at the University of Lausanne taking this class. And I have found that, especially over the last 9 years, a huge privilege to be able to teach anthropology, my discipline, to this large group of students, most of whom will not go on to become anthropologists or pursue a PhD in anthropology, but it's my chance to teach them, to guide them, to try and reveal what I find most important, even urgent about anthropology. And I get to do that every week for the entire year. And so there's absolutely no doubt, as tiring as that is, especially since I'm teaching in French, which is obviously not my native language, there's no doubt that I find a tremendous amount of fulfillment. However, most of my fulfillment in my academic career, both during my current position and before, comes from being immersed in research and writing projects. So I learned very early on that I love the sense of discovery that happens during research. And in my case, this is ethnographic research, which brings a particular kind of discovery. I also love, after the research is finished, or maybe during the research as well, I love the process of conceptualizing the analyses of research and imagining the structure of an article or a book in which that analysis will take place. And I love the process of trying to bring these structures, these analyses into being through writing, as difficult as that can be at times. However, and this kind of leads me to the title, is that it's the process of research and writing that I value most, rather than what happens next. In other words, if people find my writings useful, that's great. And if the ideas in those articles become part of wider debates, even better. But that is not something I think about, and it's not something that gives me fulfillment or joy. Instead, my own academic philosophy is best conveyed by an extract from one of the letters that the German writer Rainer Maria Rilke wrote to a young poet. He has his book, Letters to a Young Poet. I think it's the 4th letter. And he says in this letter, "Be patient toward all that is unresolved in your heart, and try and learn to love the questions themselves. Live the questions now." So this is a kind of phrase which underpins my own academic philosophy. In other words, for me, it's the process of research and writing. It's the process, which is the process of learning to love the questions themselves, without worrying about the answers, without worrying about what happens with that writing, what happens with the book afterwards. I stand by the writings. I will give talks about the writings. I obviously don't turn away from the writings. But for me, it was clear, and it still remains clear, that it is the process of research and writing in which I find the most fulfillment. It's working with, grappling with questions as opposed to the answers. Now, of course, I'm an anthropologist, and there often are not any concrete answers like there are in other disciplines. But in any case, that is how I have thought about my own academic philosophy, and indeed during this academic year while I've been recording these workshops, have been working on a new book based on my new research. And then, so this sense of academic philosophy remains behind how I think about my own academic career. So I hope you found some value in these 6 academic tradecraft workshops. And just to finish, I also hope that you find your own framework, your own kind of academic fulfillment, and your own path forward. And I wish you the best of luck.